Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss the 2025 Running Man, starring Glenn Powell, Amelia Jones, Josh Brolin, Lee Pace, Katie O'Brien, Coleman Domingo, William H. Macy, and Michael Cera, directed by Edgar Wright. Now, welcome back to Edgar Wright after I reviewed his films leading up to Baby Driver, and then I came back with Last Night with the Soho, excuse me, and now I'm back for his Running Man remake without Schwarzenegger involved, but Glenn Powell stars in this one. So, how did I feel about this one? Let's just get straight into this. Ben Richards, played by Glenn Powell, is unemployed because of what he did as he saved someone in the job, as he's trying to get his job back while having his baby girl Kathy with him, as his ex-boss Richard Manuel doesn't rehire him while Kathy is sick, and Richard sends him away. And Ben gets aggressive at the end of the scene as he leaves, and he sees an advertisement for a TV game show called The Running Man, where criminals escape from the hunters for 30 days. And I sort of like that as a setup, as it makes sense. Meanwhile, Ben is at home and waits for his wife Sheila to come home, and she checks up on Kathy's temperature. And this setup is supposed to make me feel sorry for Ben, but the truth is, I kind of do, as I like Ben being played by Glenn Powell more than Arnold Schwarzenegger in the original movie from 1987. And I have seen it before, the 1987 film, as his performance was good as a one note angry man while he watches the TV, seeing a show called Spin the Wheel, which is a way to make some money, but at the same time getting themselves killed. And Ben looks for one of the Kathy's socks, and later on we find out he has it in his pocket while he goes for a walk on the television network studio, starts an audition to be on the TV, and the acting was bad like it was in the 1987 movie, but not the worst, as the cinematography was fine, whereas the hell is where the hell is the fast-paced Edgar Wright, as that's his signature. And I don't feel his fingerprints in this movie, and this movie is 20 to 25 minutes too long. Ben gets in line for auditions as he helps a homeless sick man, and a guard knocks out Ben's ass down and waits all over again. And when he gets in front, and he gets rather aggressive because the clerk brings up his daughter, and he gets to the elevator and meets his neighbor Jenny Laughlin, played by Katie O'Brien, and a new guy named Tim, and they train together as Ben saves Tim's life and is almost attacked by a guard, as they're not allowed to save people's lives, as this is a corrupt and a fucked up way as system that they live in, as Ben gets tested and goes on the Running Man and gets their jumpsuits as they go on to an office of Dan Killian, played by Josh Brolin, while they see Evan McCain, played by Lee Pace, on the TV, or McCann or something like that, and they each see Dan, and as Ben doesn't want to do the Running Man because it's so fucking dangerous. And the first half is very slow, and it could have been in the editing room floor, as the original's ending was pretty tight. Editing was pretty tight. But here, too many slow scenes before we get to the point of the movie. After we meeting with Dan, he gets Dan's assistant Doug to deliver the money to Sheila and Kathy, as he makes a call to them, and he stays in the network's room and watches something that I swear to God that I thought was a ripoff of the Kardashians, and gets the sick back as well as the photograph of them. And next day comes, and we get to the host of the Running Man, Bobby T, played by Coleman Domingo, getting introduced to Ben as, I swear to God, this guy makes me think of the promoter in Rocky Five, the one that takes what's his face, Tommy Gunn from Rocky in Rocky Five. He made me think of that guy as he introduces the world to Ben, and Bobby gives people the wrong idea about Ben, Laughlin, and Tim, as he describes them as criminals, which is very fucked up to make a TV show about criminals running away from the hunters. And Bobby asks Ben for his famous last words. And the acting is pretty bad, as it is in the 1987 movie, like I said, as well as some of the Stephen King adaptations that I reviewed before. We learn the rules, and we also learn Ben has to make $1 billion if he completes the game, and some drones start filming them, and the game begins. And this is when the movie starts to entertain me from here to the final shot of the movie, although it will be a mess. I will admit this out of the way. while Ben starts running to get to an hour starts, and Ben going in a taxi cab as the driver asks for a photograph until eventually Ben asks him to pull over, and Ben runs to his friend Molly, played by William H. Macy, not a woman, to ask him for an ID card as well as a gun, and he gets an ID card and a different identity, but doesn't get a gun while Molly tries to offer Ben a job with him, which sort of hurt my head as well as we never see him again. We'll never see him again except for when he gets tortured for the rest. And it's a waste of talent for William H. Macy, as I typically like him as an actor. And we move on to the next day with Ben as a different identity going to New York City, and the material was executed fine, but not my favorite. Ben gets a video log starting 10 minutes a day, and after recording it, he can put it in a mailbox. While Molly gets tortured by McCann and tells them some information as they almost kill his ass. But luckily, it's just a dream, which annoyed the shit out of me. While Ben sees Tim getting shot dead live on the TV as day 2 begins with Ben going to Boston by a bus and sneaks into a place to rest up as he goes on a broken elevator and eventually gets in his room, which is 313, and almost gets his ass blown up with a grenade, but he's still alive until the hunters get to the place, and I'm kind of enjoying myself at this point. The hunters look for Ben as he runs out and hides while forgetting his bag for survival stuff, and he climbs down the building to get in his room while the hunters can't find Ben, but they hear him breaking a mirror and the hunters attacking Ben. Well, my favorite line of the movie is "Stop filming me," even though it was in the trailer, is said. But Ben, which worked for the trailer as well as the movie, and Ben almost gets himself killed thanks to the damn grenade blowing up as he ends up in the basement and lights the place on fire. And this may be my favorite action sequence in this whole movie. And he tells the audience he's still here, shit eaters, which was a badass line from Glenn Powell. And Ben gets help from a family that'll save his life. And I understand we have to calm down from the action sequences, but this scene slows the movie way the fuck down. Ben sees the brothers' YouTube video about the Running Man as there's a dumbass dude, the negative dude, and the final dude. And he calls Ben the final dude. And the next day comes, and the brother calling up his pen pal, Elton Perikis, played by Michael Cera later in the film, to keep Ben safe as Ben tries to expose Dan on the TV, but they're smart enough to change the dialogue into something fake that he didn't say in the first place. And the boys get Ben out of Boston by hiding him in the trunk of a car while the hunters shoot at them, and they stop and crash into, as well as run them over, and I mean the guards, or the people with the cameras, over with the car. And when one of the boys tells Ben to go to Maine to get to Elton with a gun and start a revolution that says Richards lives. And I did like the action scene while Ben gets people liking him and inspirations, but it's fun for me. Ben disguises a blind priest, which will inspire one guy to track Ben down to report for the Running Man, but Ben stops him and runs away as he wants to see his family again, and that piece of arc was not too inspiring, but it works for this movie as Ben runs to the next town and sees Lachlan getting burned dead by a couple of kids as people were cheering for Lachlan. And now they're cheering for Ben as he gets the Derry, Maine, which is pretty much where it takes place, and meets Ethan and his mother, who wants Ben dead as she's deaf and doesn't see Ben, as Elton shows him everything about his father as well as making Ben as a hero. And Michael Cera is not the best thing about this movie, despite I'm not a fan of his, but it was nice to see him working with Edgar Wright again after Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, as the characters are just fine, but not great in my opinion. Ben makes a video the next day and advises Kathy to respect her mother and says he'll keep a lookout for her as Elton's mother, catching Ben, and wants to see Ben die. And the network is alerted by Ethan Elton, excuse me. And he pretends to say Ben has attacked their house and shock the authorities with a water gun while they get other clever ways to knock them out and eventually get out of the house with something that I swear to God looks like a golf cart at one point. Ethan does get knifed to the ground and saves Ben's life, and Dan talks with Ben about winning the game with the camera drone as he shoots it down, and they get away from the authorities. And unfortunately, I meant to say Elton does die, and I could care less about that character at best. And I'm exhausted at this point, and I've got 40 more minutes of movie left, despite I'm having a good time with it, but I'm still exhausted. Ben goes on the run and sleeps in a house and imagines Sheila and Kathy being in the room with Ben as he wakes up and gets a message to Dan. And he continues to run until he finds Amelia Williams, played by Amelia Jones, hilarious, whom I guess I reviewed before in Coda, which is a movie I don't particularly remember too well. But Ben gets in her car and takes her as a hostage while getting away from the hunters as they get stopped by a couple of jackasses trying to kill Ben until the network kills the motherfuckers off. And Amelia is forced to be on the running man while she gets his gun pointed at her. And the world, as well as the hunters, let them through as Ben throws the gun outside and start negotiating with Ben Codd. And this is one of those turn off your brain movies, as it's entertaining me at this point. Ben negotiates with McCod and to get them in an airplane while he tells her to run for her life while she doesn't want to. And Ben gets to Amelia on the plane with McCod, showing his face to the audience. Can love his face as the bad guy he is. And they carry Amelia's purse, pretending there's a gun on the inside. Why the fuck can't he just keep the goddamn gun with him while on the plane, Dan exposes Ben not having a gun, and has caught him bluffing and controls McCod to not kill Ben quite yet. With Dan saying he wants Ben to work for him after leading him to believe he killed his wife. And honestly, I believe he's bluffing as well, as that was obvious. I must say, I'm exhausted at this point. Ben is upset about Dan killing his family and shows Amelia as they're bullshitting the world with people believing Ben killed his family, when really Dan is the one who had them dead. And Ben fights off and kills the pilots, while Amelia gets a parachute, and so does McCod. While Ben looks for McCod, and he suddenly appears, and they fight each other as Ben is stabbed. And McCod almost kills Ben, and Ben beats his ass by pulling his parachute while on the plane and fixes himself up with Amelia's scarf. And Ben lets Amelia off the plane, and Ben almost dies while Dan tells Ben to become a hunter, and Ben exposes Dan for killing his family while he confesses the truth about how everyone is fucked and turn off the network. And Dan bullshits the audience about what Ben said as the plane crashes. We get one of the boys' voices as we learn Ben jumped out of the plane and exposes the studio executives, I'll say, as he buys Sheila and Kathy some groceries for them and exposes himself as alive. And Bobby quits the show, as well as Dan, and Dan goes out and gets booed at while a fire comes burning, and Ben kills Dan off as he exposes himself to him as he's alive. And I was exhausted by the climax, but at the end of the day, I was entertained. But by how much? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 5.4 out of 10. Probably the weakest Edgar Wright movie, in my opinion, as I was asking, where the hell is his fingerprints? Which was fast-paced scenes, as this movie is 20 to 25 minutes too long, in my opinion. And I sort of like the execution of this movie's plot a little more than the 1987 movie. And I like Glenn Powell as the character of Ben Richards more than Arnold Schwarzenegger from the original movie, as it was one note angry. But at the end of the day, I had fun with this movie from start to finish, despite the editing being 20 to 25 minutes too long. And some of the first half needed some trimming. The acting is as bad as it was in the 1987 movie, but not the worst, as the cinematography was fine, but the first half did slow the movie down, as to a 2 hour and 13-minute movie, as it could have been cut out of the movie, but at the same time, when we get to 30 minutes into the movie to the final shot was the most fun and entertaining time I had with the movie recently, as it was executed fine but not my favorite. And I did have a good time watching this movie twice for this review, and the action sequences were a kick-ass time. I only had one favorite action sequence in the second hotel in Boston, as they as that was a fun sequence. But sometimes the movie slows way the fuck down. But don't get me wrong, this is a weak recommendation for the movie, as the family arc for Ben isn't too inspiring, but it makes sense for the movie. While the characters are just fine, but not great in my opinion. But at the end of it, the movie was just alright, and honestly, it was entertaining at best. So I'd like to thank you guys for rejoining me for Edgar Wright, and until he makes another film, stop filming me!